Dealing with a person who is constantly critical to you is so challenging. It's hurtful, it makes you doubt yourself. And so, this is an episode for you. If you have someone who is constantly critical in your life, you've tried every tool under the sun to change things, and still the critical behavior continues. Or maybe this is you being the critical one. In any case, we're going to understand the psychology behind someone who is constantly critical. And if you're on the receiving end, your psychology and what you can do to alchemize this and transmute this to greater understanding, compassion, and love. So let's get started.
Welcome to the I'm Perfectly Divine podcast, a place for the strong, sensitive, spiritual seeker to recognize the perfection of your human journey as a pathway to remembering your divinity. Worlds through proven and grounded frameworks that support you to live in the wholeness you already are. For over the past 2 decades, I have supported people from all around the world, as well as Fortune 500 companies, to dissolve the divisions within them and live with greater empowerment and love. This podcast is an exploration of the paradoxes that befuddle us as we live our lives being both human and divine. Together, you and I, along with other experts, will navigate integrating psychology and spirituality, the divine feminine and the divine masculine, the darkness and the light, to create greater sacred union from within. I believe through your remembering that you are innately divine, that you will allow yourself to more openly shine. So let's get to it, because your unique light is needed more than ever.
Welcome to I'm Perfectly Divine podcast. Today we are getting into the psychology behind people who are critical towards you and your own psychology, so that you know how to better deal with people when they are criticizing you. And we're really going to be getting into today people who are constantly criticizing you. And there's going to be a slight difference with this and part 2 in the different types of criticalness that we can experience. But obviously, overall, critical people feel like some of the most difficult people to deal with, because they seem to enjoy finding fault with you, and that's super annoying. Critical people just seem to know how to take the smallest thing and start to pick at you and pick this out with their own judgment. And the thing is that critical people are really good at finding fault with the smallest thing, and they start to pick at you with their judgment. And it's exhausting being with them, because your choices seem to be to either like shrink and feel bad about yourself, or you get into this defensive mode, right? But today I want to discuss another option, and that's really on how to alchemize what is happening. And alchemy is different because it's really about how do I transmute it. Transmutation means we are able to sift out the distortions of what is happening to understand what is going on at the core. Because when we know what's going on at the core, this is where your power is going to be to change the situation. And that change with alchemy always starts within ourselves. And the only way to transmute is to have compassion that is able to see yourself in the other person and what the other person is doing. And that way we aren't being critical back towards them with our own distortions of trying to make ourselves feel right in order to feel better, because that's exactly what they are doing. And I'm going to get deeper into this, why this is happening for them. So transmutation is very different energy than trying to be right. And when we are experiencing a critical person, they are often trying to be right. So the only way we can really get there is if we are truly able to experience compassion for this person, This is vital to alchemy because it means our vessel is clear, so or clearer, so that we can experience less distortion in the conversation. And for me personally, I feel like I have had critical people around me my entire life. And I also know I myself was a critical person. So the good news is if that you are listening and you're like, wow, deep down, I kind of know that I'm a critical person. I don't want you to despair. I don't want you to feel ashamed because you're really going to understand more about why this is happening for you. So we will get into how this occurs and how you can change it. Now, if you are someone dealing with a critical person, we are going to discuss how to create boundaries and how to do so with compassion. So what I'll say is when I was a critical person, I did it to feel right and to feel better about myself. And when we look at where alchemy comes in, it's integrating the psychology and the science to help us look at the problems that we are facing and understand the cause and effect. So let's look at this. What type of person needs to feel right is someone who feels wrong or wronged, right? So today we're going to be discussing the most common type of critic, which is someone who needs to feel right because internally they feel wrong. There's something about them inside that feels wrong, off about themselves. And then next week we'll get into the other type. So as a critic, this type that we're talking about today is exactly the type that I was. I was someone who wanted to one up others in order for my ego to feel superior. And we only do that when internally we feel inferior. And that was a lot of what I had to reckon with within myself. So on the receiving end is someone being self-righteous to you by pointing out how wrong you are. And they don't realize that they're doing this because they feel inferior and to make themselves seem superior. And what happens is this is going to often blindside you, which leaves you shrinking or apologizing and you're not sure why or what exactly you did. Or you get angry, frustrated, and defensive for being misunderstood. But here's what I know from being both critical to another and on the receiving end of it is that it is truly not about you, it is about them. And what often isn't understood is that someone who is constantly critical has some level of anxiety. They are working towards some level of perfection, trying to use that standard to make them feel good about themselves, to make them feel all right with who they are. And what makes this confusing is that they don't present themselves as how we in our minds tend to think of anxiety or an anxious person. We think of an anxious person who's someone who's like overwhelmed and they're scattered and they're worried. Oh no. These people present themselves as the one who they're the ones that have it all together. And they know better than you. This is how they come across, which is why it's harder to recognize how inferior they feel. But they are trying to live up to the standard of being enough, which is all about trying to gain a sense of superiority, but trying to have it all together, trying to be perfect. But inside of them is a whole different story that they are trying to present an image to you in order to protect themselves. So the criticalness you experience from them is honestly just a fraction of what is constantly going on in their own minds towards themselves. And this is why they have to work so hard to have it together because they always feel like they have to be on the offense with their own egos who are critical and belittling to them. So you're just receiving a dose of what is going on in their heads all the time, which is why it's going to be hard for them to even recognize that they're being critical. And we're going to talk about that. So, one of the main symptoms to someone who is constantly critical is that they can sense on some level that they can't stop this behavior. Like they've been told, like, wow, you're being really judgmental, or wow, you've been really critical about, towards me. And they know it. Like on some level, they can sense it. They know they shouldn't be so critical because they truly care about you, but they just can't seem to help themselves. This is when anxiety is running this critical person. So for anyone, when your mind knows better, but you can't stop your behavior, it's because your ego is in control. Your ego is running the show. And that's fine. Like that's great information to know. But that's why when people say like, yeah, I've gone to therapy and I get we don't get psychologically speaking, until our heart can allow us to respond better. So it's a completely different thing. So the constant critic can't help themselves from doing it because it is their anxiety that has taken over. And this belittling behavior is just normal to them because they feel it in their psychology all the freaking time. So you may remember from previous episodes, especially one of my oldies but goodies, I think it's episode 110, where I talk about shifting from anxiety to peace, that you feel anxious when you don't feel safe because you aren't trusting yourself. So this is one of the core aspects to what makes us anxious. And when you don't trust yourself, instead, you are turning to the external to affirm you and your choices. So this is very normal behavior. Like this is what we learn to do as children. We look to our parents to affirm, like, am I doing the right thing or not? But something in our psychology turned us into feeling like we can't trust ourselves, that we're supposed to turn outside of ourselves for external authority. And for a lot of women to people please. And so that's why this critical behavior can often happen with other women, because we are literally trained to be good girls, to go to the external to affirm that we are being good, and so on and so forth. And so if we don't resolve this, we continue to look to the external, and that is exhausting because you will never find a sense of peace or safety by looking outside of yourself. So here we have someone that's looking outside of themselves, trying to control what is happening on the outside in order to feel better or more safe. So what do I mean by trying to control? Things have to look a certain way in order for them not to feel a sense of discomfort from inside. So, and when there's discomfort, this is what stirs up the anxiety. And then it's that trigger, like, how can I control things to feel safer? And so it's that never ending cycle where we're trying to control things on the outside to bring me a sense of inner peace, but it's only temporary. And that cycle in and of itself is exhausting. So for anxious people, though, the benefit for them is that when you're used to looking to the external to get affirmed, you become really good at pleasing others, and sometimes that can be good. You know how to be better prepared, you know how to meet other people's needs, and this can make you a very successful person, honestly. But it's coming at the cost of one's own inner peace. and let's face it, the peace of those around them. Because if you've ever had a boss or manager that is anxious, that looking over your shoulder constantly is exhausting and it's annoying because it's like they don't trust you. But this is why it's not personal. They just don't have the skill of trust in general. So the reason why their version of being prepared is often about control, especially trying to control their external circumstances, is because that's where they're getting that sense of personal affirmation. Because their ego will tell them, okay, you've met the standard or you didn't. The problem becomes that when anyone's ego is in control, the ego keeps upping the ante as to how things need to be in order for them to avoid being judged. Any possibility of being judged. That's what their ego is on the defense, constantly trying to figure that out in their external world. And it's a lose situation because you cannot control how other people think of you. People will judge you because of their own stuff, and that's not your business. But if you make it your business, you're constantly going to lack inner peace. So here they have their ego judging them constantly. And the thing is that they're trying so hard to meet certain standards in the external world that it's even more devastating for them to be judged by another, which I know is very ironic, right? They're so afraid of being judged, which is part of why their inner critic is so strong. So here's a person whose psychology has them looking to the external to define themselves, which is why they feel they must control as many aspects of the external as possible in order to feel okay, in order to feel better about themselves. Because it's like if I get, all my ducks in a row, then of course I've met the standard and there's nothing to judge me about. But life isn't like that, right? Life is messy. And that's where things can really become overwhelming, especially for them, but especially when you are with them, right? Because you become a part of what is outside of them. And just like their external world has to be put together, has to have all the ducks in a row, now you do as well. So if you're with a constantly critical person, you're probably going to see that their home has to be just perfect, right? Well, now, if you're next to them, so do you. Because just like how their egos attach their identity to how they look or their home looks or whatever it is that their ego is getting this sense of self from that's outside of them, their ego has now attached how you present yourself and your behavior to them. So you become a projection of their own shame if you do anything that is deemed uncomfortable for them. And it's shameful if they can't get it under control. So they get triggered because something you are doing is making them very uncomfortable and they haven't learned to understand their own discomfort. So they are going to try to control you because you're part of the external that they've learned to control. And that's the only way, that is the unhealthy way that they have learned to try to gain temporary comfort. And this means manipulating you via shame into coercion with their narrative of what's right or wrong is their agenda, unconsciously, completely unconsciously. So if you think that their criticalness towards you is exhausting, which it Absolutely is. Just imagine how exhausting it is to be constantly living their life this way, trying to control their environment, which they cannot, and trying to control others and what others think of them, which they cannot. So clearly, we can see that this is an individual's problem, right? If you're constantly critical, it's something going on within you. However, once they start verbalizing their criticism towards you, this makes it now your problem to address with them. And this is exactly why we want to address boundaries and while understanding the psychology of what is going on internally with them and addressing that with compassion, not using the same ways that they have addressed you. So what's important for you to really own is that you are a sovereign being with your own standards, your own values, and honestly, your own ego to contend with. So you don't need their ego or their values or their standards. But this is exactly what is triggering to them, that you aren't bending and manipulating yourself to please others. And again, another ironic piece to this is that highly critical people are people pleasers deep down, but they don't present that way. But if we look at it like all these standards, all these judgments, who are they trying to be perfect for? It's to get others' approval so that they don't have to face others' disapproval or judgment. Because that is what worsens the intensity of their own egos. So, again, this is not conscious on their part. In fact, the vast majority of the cases of these constantly critical people, they really do love you and they truly believe they are helping you. Like these are the things you're not seeing, you're not aware of, and you need to do differently, right? So your job is to convey that they aren't actually helping you or themselves really, but in a compassionate way. So here are some things that you can do. First of all, it's to have a conversation when you know that you can be in a loving place about this, where you're not going to, where certainly when you're not in a place of anger, because again, hopefully you can see your own criticalness, your own critical behavior that came from a place of your own self-consciousness, your own anxiety. And so when you're at that place, and it may take a while to get to that place, but you really want to be honest about that. And where the conversation can go is like, I feel like when we are together, you want me to live by your standards or your set of rules rather than my own. And that's not fair to either of us. And then number two, what you can do is to provide examples of how they have been critical or made you wrong. And it's not about having emotion behind this. It's just to kind of set the stage of like, here's some examples of where this went off for me. And what you're doing is you want to start to demonstrate a pattern so that they can recognize this because again, they've been swimming in their own fishbowl where like this is normal. This is normal for the ego to pick and judge and be critical. So we want to start to demonstrate a pattern because again, most of the time it is not intentional. And then three, provide examples of a different perspective. So you can say, here's how I viewed the situations or the scenarios in which you were judging me, and kind of offer them that there's not like one right way. You can understand that and honor that they may have a certain way, but it doesn't have to be yours. And the thing is, to keep in mind with all this, if they can't take in your perspective, then they don't care about you as much as they claim to. Like if their whole point is to say, well, I'm sharing this with you because I care about you, you can state that this isn't care for you, right? Like this doesn't feel caring. And this may be where a further boundary may need to be implemented. But you want to do so in a way that allows for change to occur, right? Like you're able to say, like, right now you're not respecting me, and until we can have a respectful conversation where we can talk about both sides, then this isn't going to work for me because we're not actually having a conversation. So it's okay to be able to go there and to say, feel free to reach out to me when you are willing to have a respectful conversation that includes being able to include a perspective beyond your own. That's completely fair to say. So that's how the boundary would look. So there's some steps to have a conversation, address the pattern, address that there are different perspectives at play, and really take in if they're willing to even take in your perspective. Because something to keep in mind is that critical people often cannot admit that they are making mistakes. And so this is where you really want to be careful that they don't turn to gaslighting. And so I also want to give some common examples of what it sounds like when they're trying to gaslight you. And so you know how to address that within yourself or with them. Okay. So gaslighting number one, I kind of mentioned, I'm only telling you this. They might say to you, I am only telling you this because I care about you. So what you want to keep in mind is that their care for you does not mean that their criticalness is okay. They may actually truly care about you, but that doesn't mean that they are actually demonstrating care towards you. When someone demonstrates care, they show respect and compassion, not shame and righteousness. So you can say, I'm not saying that you don't care for me, but you are not being caring to me in my heart and how you're speaking to me. And that usually kind of wakes someone up, right? When you really differentiate between what we call care and demonstrating care. Another thing that they might say to gaslight you, I just say things how they are. Okay, well, what you're saying when you say things just how they quote unquote are, then that's your opinion, which again is just about you, and that's not demonstrating care. So if you want to help me, the first thing you would do is show compassion and respect to support me, not degrade me. Number three, they may say, you or your behavior is embarrassing. You're just embarrassing me. So this is where you have to know, like my own version of what is wrong and this other person's version of what is wrong are two different things. So the gift is you get to live your life according to your standards. And then it's allowing them to live their life according to their own standards as well. But it's not caring to try to control other people's standards. And so if something is embarrassing to you, that is something for you to, look at, because you're the one not doing the behavior, right? So why are you so attached or what have you to someone outside of you, right? And this may be the perfect segue actually to discuss that what might actually be going on that's causing them to be so critical is their own anxiety. And I've had to have that conversation with someone that I've cared about. And it's just being able to say, like, I think it's an anxiety that is making you see things as wrong or embarrassing or can potentially go wrong. But that's not how I live my life. I used to live my life that way too, because I was really locked in about what do other people think about me. But what I realized is the more I did that, the more anxious I felt, the more out of control I felt. I wasn't happy. So I've had to work really hard to develop the skill to trust myself. And by doing that, I've learned I can also trust others. And they get to be their own person and they get to figure things out and navigate things should they make a mistake or do something that's off or quote unquote wrong. And so really being able to explain, what I mean by this is that I have this intention to live as a loving, kind, compassionate, respectful person as possible, which means being responsible to admit mistakes that I make. So I'm not coming from this place that I'm always going to get things right. I just know that I'm able to have a conversation if I get things wrong. So all of this really frees me up to live my life in a way that truly makes me happy. And I want that for you too. But it seems to me that your ego is always looking for that worst case scenario with yourself and with other people around you, including me. And that's the viewpoint of your anxiety, not the real you. Because it's not. That's not the essence of that person. And so I was fortunate enough that, the person that I had this conversation with was actually able to take this in. They did some self-reflection, which is what I hoped for them, because I personally know what it's like to live with the inner critic, and it's not fun. And it makes life much harder than it needs to be. So when I look at this type of criticism and what one has to do to overcome it within themselves, the gift is that the universe is never, ever looking for perfection from us. And like, how freeing is that, right? The ego is the only aspect that is looking for perfection from us. So the universe is simply guiding us to act with intention from our hearts. And this is where karma comes in, because karma knows the energy of your true intentions. Like, you can't fake out the universe and karma. So when you are living with good intentions, you also hold good intentions towards others. And that leads to greater compassion, so that when a mistake happens, it's not personal. Like, this stuff happens. So in the end, you really do learn to take things less personally, which feels a hell of a lot more freeing. So yes, we are still going to make mistakes, even if it's not our intention. This happens because this is what allows us to learn deeper compassion, forgiveness, and what it means to take personal accountability and responsibility. But if you get stuck trying to live out the expectations of your ego, your intention deep down is to prove yourself by trying to do everything and anything that you can to be right. And the more that we live this way, the more easily offended you're going to be. because you are still in constant judgment about, quote unquote, right and wrong from a limited ego-based perspective. So the good news with all of this is that by being willing to work on your own anxious, critical reactions, is that you are going to learn to truly trust your heart. And this will make life more peaceful and filled with ease. Exactly, because you don't have to be the judge and jury of everything anymore for yourself and for others. And it's truly freeing. Now, the blessing you can find in dealing with the constant critic that's coming towards you is that this is going to deepen your own self-trust and compassion, because you are likely, especially at first, you're going to fall into questioning yourself again and doubting yourself when you're criticized. I mean, this is part of being human. This is natural. But ultimately, what's going to happen is you are going to learn to trust yourself at such a deep level that you can speak your truth, which no longer has anything to do with winning or fighting to be right. It's just speaking your truth from love. So next week, we are going to discuss the other type of critic that you may be dealing with and the slight nuances to understand about the psychology going on there, so you can show up feeling both empowered and compassionate when criticism arises. So along with that, what I also want to share is like what might be going on for you on a spiritual level and why this is important as well. So let's, I think that feels complete for today. I want to thank you so much for being with me on this journey, for wanting to understand the deeper psychology, wanting to know how to go beyond transformation, but going to transmutation, totally different. But I'd love to hear from you. Like, is this helping you? Is this supporting you? Or is there something I can more deeply explain to support you on your journey? So I'm always open to that. You can email me at support@michellebursell.com. So until next time, know that there is nothing to prove, just to remember. I'll see you next week.
I am so honored you have joined me today. If you enjoyed the I'm Perfectly Divine podcast, subscribe so you don't miss any of our power-filled episodes. Also, if you know another who is sensitive and spiritual, and wants to dive deeper into emotions and ancient wisdom, so they too can create profound peace and fulfillment from within, please share this podcast. Thank you again for joining me, and I look forward to reconnecting with you soon.